I want to ask you a question. Have we got the roving mics? How many of you store food? About half, less. How do you store it? Fridge? Freezer? Say that? Body, that's a perverted sort of answer, but very good. But unfortunately, if you're heavily obese and you've stored a lot of it, it won't be good for when the electricity goes out. The problem with your answer is that at the moment, we've got very little preparation for shocks. And I'm here to talk to you. Is John Cherry here? John or Joanna? They asked me, John wrote to me and said, Tim, your report on civil food resilience is causing a lot of sort of rumbles in the food and farming world. Would you come? And I said, yes, I would. For him, I would, and them, I would. So I'm here. My name is Tim Lang. I'm an old git, basically. I'm retired professor. I'm Professor Emeritus of Food Policy at City St George's, University of London. You couldn't be further from a farm if you tried. Where we run a very successful master's program in food policy. We got anyone? We got 2 people from our center. There are a few. Goodness, that's nice. This is a unique program which basically pulls together all the disciplines and says, what are we going to do about it? I don't know if you were on here in the big tent 2 hours ago to 1 hour ago when Henry Dimbleby was interviewing and discussing with George Eustace, former Secretary of State, and Justin King, former sort of luminary of the food industries. And I know Henry well and the others slightly. I didn't get a sense of any notion of preparing for shock. And I retired 4 years ago, was having a nice life, age 73, and doing some things. And basically got asked by a body none of you will have heard of, called the National Preparedness Commission. Have any of you heard of that? Yeah, 1 or 2, that's good. Started 4 years ago by some very genial people, some very interesting, former heads of MI5 and MI6, but alongside mayors, deputy mayors, people from across British society, very interesting in what we would call the great and the good, who basically pulled together and said, look, this was a bad time 4 years ago politically, we're in a bad time again, but, or still. And they said, are we prepared for shocks? Looking at everything across British society. And it's mostly done sort of inside track stuff. And they said, look, we're aware food is an issue. Would you do us a report on food? And I thought about it and said, basically, yes. And to cut a long story short, I said I'd do it in a year. It took me 2.5 years. Because what I did was went around and interviewed very senior people, down to you and me, across British society. People who looked ahead, people who were in the present, people who were growers, people who were at the end of the food chain, people who had nothing to do with the food chain. And I asked them essentially a rolling set of questions. Do you think there are shocks? What shocks are they? How prepared is the British public for this? I tend to show my slides. Are they both showing there? I talk, you read. Okay, that's the deal. I asked them questions like this. Is the country prepared for shocks? What shocks are they? Are the structures appropriate? Very sort of policy wonkish stuff. But all the question I began to ask you, do you store food? What are you doing? And so on. And from this, an extraordinary, though I say it myself, picture came, which I will save you reading 365 pages of the report by saying it's one word, complacency. Britain is a complacent food system. It's not thinking about the realities except in a thin way. It's not to say people aren't addressing geopolitics or addressing climate change or addressing some of the things the wonderful Groundswell addresses. But it's basically not dealing with the realities. It tends to be dealing with what happened before. When we are in a time of food weaponization, Whatever you think about Gaza and Israel, food is being weaponized. People are literally being lured. Food's being turned off. It's been blockaded. Whatever you think about it, just think about the food element of that. Think about what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine for the second time. What did it hit first? Mariupol, the export through which food to 55 countries went. What do you think about what's going on in Sudan? How many of you are even following it? Where two sides of the same country are fighting each other brutally and using food as a weapon. Well, in Britain, we don't need to worry about these things. Of course, we have an empire. Food comes, really? 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 Here's a list of the sorts of shocks that emerged from my report, with me going and interviewing insiders. All the interviews in my report are anonymous. You will never know who I interviewed. But they're extremely informed people. Essentially, we're dealing with a polycrisis. The food system is in what we call a polycrisis. It's not just climate change. It's not just weather. It's inequalities within and between societies. It's disruptions in the trade system. It's geopolitics. It's the weaponization. It's the fact that all of us are locked into assuming food is just there, and we don't need to think about it. We can get it 24 hours a day. And you get it both with electricity, the most likely shock, by the way. The British government did a review of the whole of the British state system, what would it and how would it act if the electricity and energy system went down. This was done 2 years ago. Did you know that? Any of you know that? You do now. So when I ask you, how do you store your food, think very carefully. How are you going to cook it? If you say, oh, okay, I've got a very big garden, well, how are you going to cook it? What would food for storage look like? Well, on the day the election that elected some MPs in this room was called, the then Deputy Prime Minister announced that he wanted all of you to store several days' food, 3, and to store a few bottles of water. Do any of you know how much water you need? What's that water for? Is it for your personal hygiene? Washing your hands after you've been to the loo? Is it to wash you? Is it to drink? A few bottles of water? This is childish. This isn't reality at all. I just addressed all the chief medical officers of our overseas territories, and they laughed when I put up the slide, which I will show you later, of what we're encouraged to do. They just said, one of them said to me, well, when a hurricane is about to land with us, we say, fill your bath. You're going to need so much water, and probably 2 baths outside as well. This is an element of fantasy. And some people would say, me even talking about this with you is to get you scared. It is not. It is to get you as citizens to put pressure on our elected politicians to start taking our protection seriously. My report ends up by arguing, taking a Swedish concept of total defense. One of the things I did was go to 10 countries or explore 10 countries. What were they doing? Is it just Britain that assumes everything's okay? The answer is no. But others are doing more in different ways and different thinking. Shocks come in many forms: chronic, acute, short, long-term. What David Oman, former head of GCHQ, in his brilliant book for Penguin on crisis management, calls slow burn and fast burn. We're in slow burn, climate change, but what if it goes fast burn? Are we prepared for that? That's what the National Preparedness Commission came in. What if it's a localized shock as opposed to a nationalized shock or an international shock? We've got lots of threats and risks. I'm not here to scare you, but let me just tell you, there is a system called the National Risk Register, which analyzes, it's about every 2 or 3 years, what risks face British society. Anyone know how many risks officially face British society? Guess. I'll save you the trouble. It's 89. How much does food in those? Which of those is food? 1. I do not know anyone who thinks there's just one food risk facing us. Much more. So one of my recommendations is that we need a new, better food-focused risk assessment. Why does that matter? Because wherever you live in the UK, there is a local system of crisis management called, in England and Wales, the Local Resilience Forums, who are basically the blue light zones. They'll come to you if this tent blows up. They'll be here, eventually, and they'll be brilliant. But when it comes to food, because I surveyed them, they said, look, we saw in COVID, food's coming on the agenda, and we didn't know what to do. And some of them, when I asked them, said, well, what do you think should happen? They said, well, that's not our problem, it's DEFRA. Now, that's not a good position to be in. So my report makes lots and lots of recommendations. If you want to be really bored, but it's cheaper than alcohol or drugs, download my report. It's free. I would not have done it unless it was publicly available. All of the national preparedness is downloadable free. It's called Just in Case. Why? As I will talk shortly. We have a food system over the last 50 years that's been revolutionized around just-in-time systems. Storage is gone. The whole point of the last 50 years is to get rid of storage, to cut cost, to speed it up, to move it fast, and so on. And I promised you it. Here is the government's official website. Has anyone looked at this? It's called Prepare. No, none of you have. I hope you all do, because that's the vacuous, in my view, you can quote me, recommendation: you store a few bottles of water. Forget it. Fill your bath. At one level, you could say this is helpful. It's beginning to think about things. It's at least not ignoring the problem, but this is not the way to address a literate, thoughtful set of consumers. Just to tell you, average UK use of water, anyone know how much water the average Brit uses per day? How many litres? 120? 300? It's 139. That's a lot of water. How many bottles of water? Do you see why I was very upset, genuinely upset, and then very angry when this was produced? It's nonsense. Well-meaning, but nonsense. We have a problem, which is not only is advice like that unrealistic, but it's not even talking about food in a proper way. What sort of food? How are you going to cook it? Is it multiple, if you like baked beans? Do you store 24 tins of baked beans and the tin opener, not an electric one? What actually, you've got kids? What is it going to be? How are you going to do it? Should we even bother? Do you just say, okay, I give up? You know, it's understandable. What storage capacity? People I interviewed straight away at the beginning said, people don't have storage. They don't have houses or flats which are designed around that. They haven't got the equipment. Then when I went to other countries, the closer I went to Russia I went, to Sweden and Latvia, for example, this is all in my report, they took it very seriously indeed. I had the pleasure to interview the key person who had actually developed Latvia's food resilience plan. Okay. He went out of the room and came back and gave me a great stack. He said, rule number 1, the websites have gone down. So do we give people information on our website? No, we gave them cards. Sweden gives every household a booklet giving minute details of what they can and should do, and is doing classes. Finland, down to the local level, to the household level, saying, there will be no, the Latvians said, there will be no government. It will have disappeared. This is if Russia invades. You notice my list of shocks, I didn't put Russia might invade. We're assuming that won't happen. It's a low likelihood. Pretty. The situation, however, is not helped by this, which is this graphically, forgive it, on the top left, ringed in my delightful yellow, That's the image the food industry has developed, getting rid of storage, everything moving smoothly from farm to the shopping trolley. Okay? And it's all underpinned by the equally smooth logistics industry. In farming and growing, you have tended to demonize the retailers. No one has been thinking about the logistics industry. It's the logistics industry that matters most. And they were fantastically useful and interesting and informative to me. But it's all this satellite-based, or actually cable-based information. It's software stupid, not just oil stupid, the food system. If we want to be thinking about making it more resilient, and by the way, how good is your Latin? From the Latin resilio, to literally bounce back. And that notion was taken into what now we call physics. But it means different things to ecologists than it done to physicists or to architects. Architects will assume they want the building in a what's it called, earthquake, not to move, but to bounce back. Ecologists will assume actually the system might move. It might become something totally different. So resilience is a word that is used by bankers and shock planners. Think very carefully how has someone used the word resilience. Don't just use it vacuously. The situation is not helped by the state of food. I'm not going to tell you people, you know about it. The overproduction of food, not underproduction. There's too much food in the world. Cheap commodities, flooding and being turned into what we now call ultra-processed food. We have a divided society. That doesn't help either. But one of the key findings of my report was this: we don't know how the British would react to food shocks. We don't know. There are some pointers from behavioral science. I have a PhD in social psychology, by the way, so I was particularly interested in that. We have actually a mix of new and old dependencies. We're de-skilled for the new shocks. What good is your cooking skill if your food is stored in a freezer where the food's gone off? Do you obey the label or do you not? We want some realism in our advice. My report is deeply boring, but I recommend you download it because you can skim it. And if you see anything in red, read it, because those were points that people said, we should be doing this, and I would put it in red. So I was flying kites, possible things to do. There are big tables in the report about vulnerabilities. You think you're not vulnerable, you are. Everyone is vulnerable. The key thing is to stop us thinking that we're individuals and to start thinking communities. As one military person said to me, we've got to stop the me, and think us, us, us. And he or she was right. We're not sure how industry would react. It depends where and what. I talked to some industries that had some advice from government. There's a system of publicly available specifications, PAS 96, which advises companies on food defense, how to defend your company, what to do about it, about reputational risk or damage or malware or software. There are huge businesses emerging now protecting companies about and in relation to cyber security. Is it working? Yes, but no. That's why you see Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op taken out. You may say, well, that doesn't matter. That's only 2 out of our big 9 retailers that provide 94.5% of British food. But if you're on the Orkneys or the Shetland, that was it, because the Co-op was it. And these are all seen by some, the realists, as just being softening up and preparation. Sweden takes very, very seriously indeed, not the software alone, it takes that seriously, but cables. Actually, the so-called internet, the cloud, when you think you're being clever, oh, I've got it all backed up. It's actually in a hill somewhere. And the government's just passed regulations and advice to build more nuclear power stations to fund the data centers, to power the data centers. Here's the front cover on the left of the PS 96, Guide to Protecting and Defending Food and Drink from Deliberate Attack. It's good. It was started to be prepared, 15 years ago. It's on its 4th version now. On the right is the front cover of the IGD, the Institute of Grocery Distribution, a very respected and very good, dare I say it, food retail think tank, which last year produced, when I was doing my report, a very good report on the 10 shocks coming to Britain. And actually, none of that was about consumers. I wrote to them and said, look, this is great, because they used to criticize people like me. And now here were they saying, look at these shocks, we can't avoid this. But not one was about the public. It was all assuming if we protect supply, everything's okay. But let me just tell you, some of my experts that I consulted said, what if there's panic? What if people clear shelves? That's not a supply issue, that's a total disruption of the just-in-time system. One of the things I did, forgive me if you can't read this, was I looked. The 9 retail giants that provide 94.5%, do you want me to say it again? 94.5% of all retail food. Here I spent quite a long time tracking this data down. They've got about 12,284 actual outlets. So the bottom line, if you can see it, but those all go through 131 hubs. One of the things the logistics industry said, we might be big companies, Tim, on the brand of the lorry, but we're overwhelmingly 5 lorry little family firms of mostly men aged 60 plus, bored out of their brains and thinking, why are they doing this? They're making that, my report, the theme of their conference this year. I think this is industry taking it seriously. If you want to know where food comes through, forgive me this if these things you don't like, but it's basically to say nearly 20%, it's about 18%, comes through Eurotunnel and Dover Folkestone. If you add in London Gateway and London Tilbury, you'll find well over a quarter of all food just comes through one narrow gap. This is a very interesting failure to diversify, because rule number 1 in resilience thinking, by the way, is diversity is resilience. Diversity is resilience. Where is government in this? Well, most governments I talk to have resilience plans, and you'll be very pleased to know Britain has resilience plan. How many of you knew or know that there is a government resilience framework? MPs are not allowed to put up their hands. 2, 3, 4, 6, 7. Okay, you're all going to go and find it out. And I'm going to give you the front cover in a moment. Basically, Britain is not taking food or food resilience seriously. And yet there is a structure, the government resilience framework. Even green economists I interviewed didn't know about this documentation. Why? Because it's not from DEFRA, it's from the MOD. And the MOD and the Cabinet Office basically have done a very good job of setting up different ways of thinking about resilience for the country. And here, whoops, I can't get it, are the front covers. On the right is the front cover of the UK Government Resilience Framework. There it's got the Thames Barrier. On the left is the front cover of the 2-year-old National Risk Register, and in the middle is the foundation legislation of all of it, the 2004 Civil Contingencies Act. But you probably can't read it, what I've put in red. The government resilience framework, which doesn't talk about food at all, by the way, has 3 excellent principles. One is prevention is better than a cure. I work in a public health department. I totally agree with that. The second is we must have a whole of society approach. That is why I come and talk to you. That's why I asked you at the beginning, what do you do? Are you prepared? What do you store? If it's a whole of society approach, why has it missed you out? The answer is you haven't been brought in. You haven't been consulted, and your MPs aren't helping you, but they need to. So you need to help them. And the third, a very policy wonkish thing, is we've got to get everyone, basically, as they say in Cumbria, to stand on the same carpet. You've got to have a shared understanding of what's happening. That's what Sweden has done. That's what Latvia has done. That's what Lithuania has done. That's what Germany has done. That's what Switzerland has done. Switzerland is the only major country which has major food storage. Anyone know how much food Switzerland stores? 3 months' worth of food. That's astonishing. And it's debated, it was thinking about passing a piece of legislation last year, still being argued about, to raise it to 1 year. The counter-argument is, this is money for old rope for the storage companies, this is a disgrace, this is a payola from the state citizens and the taxpayers of Switzerland. What's the point of it? That's an argument they can have because they're Swiss, we're not. I promised you this. Did I promise you? I think I promised you this. There is a system under the Civil Contingencies Act called critical national infrastructure. This is all 14 of them. Last year, when Labour was just elected, he put data centres, I think rightly, onto the list. But if you noticed in red, food is one of the previously 13 critical national infrastructures. When I read that, which I knew 5, 6 years ago, when I thought about doing this piece of research, that was my starting point. Okay, it's said to be a critical national infrastructure. What are we doing about it? Well, the answer is the National Risk Register says you don't need to worry about it. Therefore, the Community Risk Register, wherever you live in the UK, there is a Community Risk Register attached to your local resilience forum. 38 in England and Wales, 4 in Scotland. 4 of those 42 are in Wales. Northern Ireland's got another system. And those are all about the blue light brigades coming. But what we're talking about in food isn't blue light brigades. It may be, but it's not. Mostly the thinking under the government resilience framework is about preparing for the London Underground being blown up. Having narrowly missed it in July 2007, I'm extremely partial to that. And my son-in-law is one of those paramedics who's trained as a result of that to be, if this blew up and was burning, he'd come and get us out. He's trained for exactly that. He's super fit, super strong, trained to delve into concrete, in fire, and come out. That's fantastic. What's that got to do with food resilience? Not much, unless it's storage going up. We have state powers for legislators. I interviewed, let me choose my words carefully, former senior lawyers of the British state. And I said, Tim, we've got emergency powers. We've got Emergency Powers Act, 1920, 1939, 1940. Why were they in 1939 and 1940? I can't think. 1964, none of them are specific. Only the Civil Contingencies Act 2004 started resurrecting a notion of civil defense. Now let me ask you a question. I asked it in an earlier session, so if you were that, you're not allowed to answer. How much money do you think the British state allocates for each of you, so per person, on civil defence? £1. You've been to my talks before. Good guess. Actually, just below, about 96 pence. It's 65 million pounds for 67 million people. Out of the total Ministry of Defence budget, 55 billion. Okay, which is just going to double in the next 10 years, I think rightly. I think our defence is severely weak, much too mechanical, and the good thing about the NATO agreement that the Prime Minister has just signed on to is that of the taking it up to 3.5% is hardware, so defense, hard military defense, and 1.5 is infrastructure type stuff. Now, I think food defense should be part of that 1.5. So we've got very big politics. I'm looking at least one MP to say, we have to get this sort of argument gently and persuasively put in. We've got to rethink it. There's been lots of good things. Don't get into a worry. We've got GCHQ doing really good stuff on cybersecurity, but it's not keeping up with the enormity. It's preventing a lot of accidents and difficulties, but it's not necessarily on top. When you go to Sweden, Sweden decided 10 years ago that if there was a terrible military invasion, I wonder why it was thinking about that, we're going to need to involve the public. So they developed a concept, much discussed in defense circles, called total defense. That means we, the public, are involved in defense. And that's what the Latvians did when they said, the government will have been wiped out. It's going to be down to the household, the community, the village, the town level. And Sweden, unknown to me, even though I was doing a case study on it, the people I interviewed, many people in Sweden, although only one was quoted, didn't tell me about it or didn't know about it. Unknown to me, while I was doing my report, it was doing a cabinet review. And it came to exactly the same conclusions as I came to, which was very gratifying to me. And it said, we need more storage. We've got to involve the public. We've got to decentralize that storage. We can't assume the EU is going to feed us. You think all that EU food on which we depend comes through the London Gateway, the Dover, Folkestone, very narrow pinch points. It's known in the literature as pinch points, and I'm not rocket science telling you this. What Sweden has done, producing in its big report, which came out last year, is basically, I think, being a very good early warning for us. I have put out, I promised you this, did I? No, I've taken it out. I thought I'd put in a slide, did I? No, I didn't, I'm sorry. I was going to put in the slide of the figures. Anyway, I've talked it through. This, I'm not going to explain it, but basically there is a structure in the British state going from the very top, the central government, Prime Minister, Cabinet Office, Ministry of Defence, what happens if anything happens, down to the local level, and in red at the bottom, the crisis. All the thinking so far is about the possibility of one crisis. All the evidence that my interviews and studies and literature searching pointed to was multiple crises. What we're not doing is planning for multiple crises. And that is actually what we've got to do. And that's where a lot of the things that I looked at and were taken to and visited and learned from, community activities, people doing community gardens, people in working class tenement areas in Scotland, digging it up and over 15 years building communities, and it all being celebrated in big tents like this, in big collective meals. They were developing basically community power, community resilience. So the gardening wasn't just good for the food, the gardening is about community, building solidarities, changing from passive recipients to active citizenships. What do we need? Well, we need civil food resilience. This phrase I coined for my report said, look, we need to plan just in case. It's not mad to think about it. Events are piling up, not just M&S and Co-op being taken out, but Spain and Portugal, still not clear what happened, blackouts. We're having early warnings all the time. The big business network recently surveyed all their member firms. 27% had had ransomware attacks last year. This is not some mad old professor's fantasy world or nightmare world. It's actually happening. And I'm going to show you a slide you'll never read at all unless you download it. But this is the sort of thing I've worked very hard on. This took about a week, believe it or not. You're not going to read it at all. But interviewing people, I came up with a list of what could we do. It goes from stockpiling, skills development, grow some food, maybe. Could farmers actually start growing food rather than commodities, all that sort of stuff. Crisis catering, big lack of thought. Can you have a big lack of thought? No thinking about using mass catering in crises. I was, I don't know about you, very angry with the then government in COVID when it closed down hospitality. Hospitality is closer to where people live, had the skills for mass cooking, wasn't about individuals, could have done more. And certainly if things are very bad, you need crisis catering. Rationing food, it's unsavory. I want government bodies, the Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, you'll not heard of, but it's very important. It sets the benchmarks for British diets. They should be doing dietaries, saying what do we need, giving advice for different demographics and types of people, what could and should you store depending on your circumstances. We need to engage food banks to become food stores. We need to do all sorts of things. The ideas poured in from my interviewees, and no doubt if we turned this into a groupie group, you'd come up with lots of different ideas too. But the point of my talk is to actually say this is ultimately a matter of democracy, talking to each other, talking to our councils, talking to our MPs. And my friend in the front row here, Robin, sent me to Belgium to go and have a look at what they're doing. There are food belts, little deindustrialized towns, developing around their edge horticulture as the beginnings of doing something useful. There's a lot of really boring stuff in my report, but a lot of ideas for you to save you. So, well, here's some examples. Here's one of my favorites. Not that you have favorites, of course. In North East Welsh, I'm partly Welsh, I'm very interested in this. So the 4 photos on the left are from a group called Flintshire, which 15 years ago, 5, 6 people got together and said, let's talk about it, what are we doing, could we grow more? And it turned out they asked local landowner, a big estate, gave them 4 acres. They ended up with 3 sites across the tiny county, and they've built it into something that has regular dinners and shares food among 160 households. The 4 on the right is in Granton in Edinburgh, a very deprived part of Edinburgh. Slowly, over 15 years, they've dug up the greenery of dog shit and turned it into horticulture. There's their annual dinner and lunch. You know, this is about building what the boring academics call social capital. My report gives 7 lessons, 7 steps to government. There they are. It's basically learning from others, assess the public. We don't know how the British would react. We need to be included, to engage. I think one of the key recommendations of my report is wherever you are, we could and should be doing what I call in the report, mapping community food assets. What have you actually got? The people in Shetland and Orkneys, when the co-op went down, they knew what their assets were. And I'm about to go to the Orkneys to talk with them, and the council wants to discuss how can they develop further. So there are some people beginning to engage with this, some cities beginning to engage with it. We could do a lot more. But the key thing, hence me being here, besides the lovely John and Joanna Cherry asking me to come and do this, was to throw this out to you. I've spent 2.5 years of my life, instead of digging my garden, which I managed rather badly for 2.5 years, I have been doing this because I'm saving you a lot of time. So pick up and run with it, download it. If you put my name, Tim Lang, just in case, or you put National Preparedness Commission, but that's much longer than writing Tim Lang, and download it, and then use it. But essentially, it amounts to, oh, what have I done there? What's that one? Oh, yeah, I was giving you that. Yeah, it amounts to this. Essentially, what we've got to do and encourage our politicians to think and encourage ourselves to think, if we want food as resilience in communities, it requires an underpinning of infrastructure, of central government giving us the support and the nod to do it, not just putting it on a website and saying, store 3 bottles of water. You know, please treat that with the contempt that it represents for us. Local government, directors of public health, environmental health, the people who know what's going on, the churches, the faiths, the community groups, you. What it needs is to, I think, have a new structure. Here I get very policy wonkish, I don't apologize for it. We've got to have, I think, local food or civil food resilience committees. I think sustainable food places and some of those sort of bodies are becoming that. They're actually becoming networks, bodies, which provide information, where Rob Hopkins sent me to in Liège in southern Belgium. I was at a meeting of their food council that's come out of the last 15 years. It was 150 people, but that was for a whole city. And they knew each other, and they were doing different things. And it was the collective effort that mattered, but the mayor and the council backed it. And that's what we don't have. It's beginning in some British cities, but not enough. What it amounts to, my thinking, is this. We've got to prepare for not one crisis. Is that one crisis? Yeah. But we've got to prepare for multiple crises. My organogram here modifies the current British state's organogram and puts in that red on the right and green taking us seriously, consumers and the public, and says we need to have representation in what I've called local food resilience committees. That, I think, is what we need to be doing. Now, I've given you a little foretaste. What have I told you? I've said I think food is largely ignored, but we do have a resilience framework. We've got to accelerate what exists. There are some good practices and good things going on. It's not a matter for depression. There are lots of good things. But we aren't engaging with at-risk groups within that. The inequalities agenda is very important. We've got lots of people doing very interesting projects like Fix Our Food in Yorkshire. The Welsh food partnerships are fantastic. If you don't know about them, why should you? But the point is, that's what we want the state to do, to provide that infrastructure. We've got to demand this of the state. We've got to get a grip of food security. If I had 3 minutes with the minister, I'm not here tomorrow, but you will, this is what I'd say. You've got to create new food resilience committees. You've got to do realistic community risk registers, not just saying food isn't a problem because some retailer tells you and then tells me in an interview something totally different. We've got to have advice from bodies like SACN, Scientific Advisory Committee on Nutrition, on what proper civilian storage could be and how it could be done. We've got to expand national stockpiles. Gibraltar was cut off by Franco. I bet I'm one of the oldest people in this room. We remember Franco, the Spanish dictator. He cut Gibraltar off. They learned from that. Gibraltar stores 3 months of food. I know that because the Minister of Health told me last week. Switzerland, Sweden, I think we've got to take mass catering very seriously. I come to this, to the lovely Groundswell. I see small businesses in mass catering. You don't have to have a big caterer to do mass catering. It may be best to have small caterers en masse. What would that need? That would need organizing. That would need the council to know, you to know what could kick in if things are very bad. And above all, of course, I hope none of this is necessary. But the point is, as my title says it, a title which I was proposed by the logistic industries. When I was talking with them, they said, Tim, we call this just in case. It's not just in time that they've spent 60, 50 years getting rid of storage. How could they increase storage fast? Because I tell you, if you look, that would be another talk. If you actually look at the storage industry, it's old, it's out of flunter, and it's inadequate. So actually, we have a lot to do as citizens. So I now want questions, thoughts, ideas. Do you want to shout? Who are the roving mics? Roving mics, they're walking miles up here. There's a lady here, I think. Do you want to say, can you ask a question? Is this relevant, by the way? Is it? None of you have fallen asleep? Good. No. I wasn't. That wasn't a hint. That wasn't a hint for applause. But thank you very much. The thank you for me is being invited to come and share what I've done with you. Can you say what's your question? What's your point?
I'm Judy Kell-Hammond from the CLA, and my question is, Is the devolution agenda going to help this at all?
I think it could do, but it depends if the pressure on the devolved politicians works. The devolution is already, in a typically British way, may I be frank, divided. London's mayor has different powers to Birmingham's, to Manchester's, to East Midlands. The unitary authorities have not all got the same powers. But this is something I've been talking to the mayors. I'm actually on the Mayor of London's London Food Board, but I actually haven't got through on this, I'll confess, but I had a very useful meeting for 2 hours recently with the Mayor of East Midlands, who was really interested in this, a new person, a year into the job. But the devolution, my point is devolution down to what? If you notice, all my organograms go national government, so UK, down to the devolved, so London, Wales, put them on an equal footing, down to the local, to the community. You've got to have people with powers and with roles at all those levels. Now that's an ideal world. Put it this way, if there was World War III, that would happen within a month. Within a month. My point is we need to begin gently a process of beginning something that could help that. I would like food and civil resilience, civil food resilience, to be on the devolution agenda, is my short answer to you. Next question. Here, have you got the, oh, okay, it's over there, forgive me.
I'm what some people call a prepper,
How much food do you store?
I've got about 2,000 tons of wheat, 500 tons.
A certain approach.
I also have my own flour mill, my own oil press, my own dairy.
So you're in a privileged position. Would you share it?
Okay. The point, I'm also working with people on local telecommunications and things like that.
Right.
My point is, those awful words, I'm from the government, I'm here to help, are the most terrifying words. Aren't you totally wrong trying to persuade government to do this? And what you should be doing is saying, the government's not going to come to rescue you, it's up to you. Start organising your street, your town.
I am saying that, you're absolutely right. I don't think it's the most terrifying thing that can be said. I'm from the government, I can hear it. It was Milton Friedman who said that, or someone, Ronald Reagan or someone. I think actually they're not either ors, to be really frank. My report considered that very carefully and said it's not you either do it all yourself or it's up to the government. Actually, you need underpinning, whether you're at the community level or at the city level or indeed at the national level. And inevitably, that just does involve the government, whether we like it or not. I think it's said in all government circles of left, right, whatever, is that national defense is the first duty of the state. My point is, if you think about food as a civil critical national infrastructure, we're not getting the protection that we should have. But that does need local action. I totally agree with you. That does need us to do what we can at the community level. I repeat, as another military person that I interviewed, who I didn't know was military, by the way. You meet some interesting people in the world, who I thought was one, but actually turned out to be the other, who said he'd had a very interesting discussion with his neighbor about such matters, who said, don't worry, we're all right. I've got a gun, I've got a big larder. And the person I was interviewing said, don't be so stupid. You need your neighbors, it's not you. You know, he was yet another person who basically said, think us, 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 hence me. And I wasn't doing it as a cheap point, forgive me if it seemed that. I was saying, are you going to be able to share that? We need to do that in a structured way. It's better for that to be fairly orderly than just randomly, because then you just get rich societies doing it and the poor societies riot. And then it becomes a big problem. I'm involved in 2 research projects on the edge of it, where we've been looking at what would happen in condition X. And the likelihood of riots and public disorder is immense. And you're seeing that with misinformation, malinformation, fake news, not in the Trump way word, but literally lies and distortion. So you're going to have something that provides a commonsensical approach and source of advice. But you're right to ask the question. Next question.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello,
Yep. And we'll come down here.
I'm a sheep farmer up in Oxfordshire. My name's Nick Sinden. I would say I'm on the front line of climate change. I've been farming 20 years, and I wouldn't say there's going to be I wouldn't say when there's going to be a food shortage. There's going to be a food shortage. Yeah. But my question to you is, how do you think Rachel Reeves' policy on agricultural property relief, the family farm tax, how is that going to affect food security in the UK?
I don't think it'll affect food security in a major way because it's declining already. I think it might accelerate that decline, to answer your question, so that you could say that's not a good effect. But Britain's, I didn't put up a slide, but there's lots of this in the report. Britain has basically got declining home production. And if you look at what we're producing, we're actually importing meat. I'm sure you know that. And the government's done a deal, well, the deal with the Americans has now legalized bringing in American meat. But in theory, it will be not of lower standards. But where's the inspection system? We don't know. So I think you're going to have to be very alert. You're going to have to put pressure through the NFU or the National Sheep Association or whatever your outlets, the CLA, back to the person here. I think all of you in the land and farming area or sectors need to come together and start talking about what can you contribute to national civil food resilience. Some of that is going to be about changed land use, which indirectly is going to be affected by property changes. I take that point absolutely. But some of it, my irritation with it, to answer you differently, was the lack of consultation about it. I thought it was just done by force majeure, but that's how the Treasury operates. It can't flag things in advance. It just does. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's just...
You can see he was shaking.
Like you say, it's just going to speed food shortage up in the UK. We're going to rely on food imports even more than ever. And when climate change gets bad, are other countries going to send food to us?
Yeah, they are.
They're going to feed themselves.
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
And we're going to have to feed ourselves. We're not going to have the land, the flock, the herds. We're not going to have the skills. We're going to be absolutely screwed. So this government is absolutely screwing the UK public over. And people need to speak up. Because now, like, it'll be too late. One day it'll be too late. And you won't
I think that's...
When your kids are hungry, look back in today.
I think you're getting a lot of support for that, and I understand that absolutely. But one of the things I'd throw back is, and it's hard if you're an upland sheep farmer, you can't exactly say, okay, we'll start growing pineapples, or sorry, bananas, Britain's favourite fruit, bananas. Are we going to get those sort of supplies? Well, all of those supplies in the 21st century are going to change. So not you, not me, certainly I'm nearly 78. I won't see that change, but your children's children will, very definitely. And we should be actually investing in horticulture above everything else and bringing back mixed farming and cropping and rotation. And that would be, that's what I personally would like to see. And there was a hint of that in my report, because my report was me taking from the experts and people I interviewed and me pulling it all together. So obviously there is a lot of me in the report, but it's based upon the findings from my report. It's very densely and carefully articulated. It's got sort of nearly 900 references in it. So I did an enormous amount of work to try and address things like you're doing. Could Britain produce more food? Yes. Will it? Only, back to the discussion with the gentleman over on your left, only if actually government signals were different. The government signals, George Eustace switched it in Brexit's name away from supporting land to supporting the environment. Great, but food was nothing. Food didn't exist. We've got an Agriculture Act, which is an Environment Act, and we've got an Environment Act, which is an Environment Act, but no Food Act. I mean, that's astonishing. Sweden's introducing a new Food Security Act to address your point. I would like us to do the same. A recommendation in my report is to do that. Next question, yeah.
Hello again, Tim. as a market gardener with microphone in hand, you've rather stolen my thunder with that horticulture point.
Well, repeat your thunder.
Well, to elaborate on it, it's something I've said many times before, is that there has existed for over 1,000 years a resilient food system in this country. And that hinges on market towns surrounded by productive communities and settlements. They're still there, but they're treated as a novelty because of the way global supply chains work. But were there shocks to that system, in order to revive those markets, you would need more producers and potentially not less consumers, but less consumptive consumers. I mean, so my question to you would be, how do we go about encouraging people to be more productive at a local level and taking what they produce to market for resilience?
That's why it was very interesting to go and see what is happening in the French-speaking bits of Belgium, where Liège, which is like Sheffield, steel and coal town, disintegrated, is rebuilding its identity around food and the much publicized notion of the food belt. I mean, it's great, but it's very small. Let me be very candid. But it's fantastically important symbolically. People know that it is possible in an area that they thought of as a steel town. You can grow food around it, and people are doing so. And indeed, academics in Sheffield, British academics, have identified that there could be a lot of horticulture in and around the urban areas, cities, not just the market towns, but your point about market towns is well said. But, you know, I live in the middle of London. You know, London is not a market town. I live in an area that was a fruit-growing area for London and Suffolk, the two original, basically, urban settlements from Roman times. This has to be thought very carefully. I'm afraid it's back to my argument with the gentleman at the back there. You know, the Mayor of London and the Greater London Assembly cannot resolve that. There's got to be some sort of government nod, or we've got to rebuild it and make a more resilient system for the Manchesters, for the Birminghams. You know. And Birmingham and Manchester are actually beginning to engage with this. They're doing some very interesting work. And in the centre, east centre of Wales, former food-growing areas, now mostly cattle and sheep areas, Hertfordshire, Shropshire, to the west, Powys, and so on. They're talking now directly with Birmingham City Council about reconnecting a short supply chain for horticultural produce. Now that's imaginative thinking. They've got the land, they've got the water, they've got the facilities, they need the financial incentives to get people to grow. If you were here for the session with Henry Dimbleby, the notion of incentives was actually one of the few things I agreed with. The rest I thought was fairly light. I would have rather had a discussion with just Henry to get his thinking. I don't think, anyway, that's me being... I never said that. I deny it all. It wasn't answering the questions we wanted. Henry would have been better at answering the questions. So I like your thinking very much, but then how do you do it practically? It means engaging politically, you know? So where you live in Devon, you live in Devon, don't you? You know, you actually live in an area where the town council is interested in this sort of thing. Further it, develop it. You've got your new allies in front here. Exeter is just saying it's established. That sort of thinking is going on. I think it's fantastic. It's exactly in the spirit of what my report pointed was we need to do. Not because I think that, because others are doing it. That's the point. Next one. We've got 1 minute more. You've got the conch.
Yeah, I just wondered, you know, this is a conference about regenerative farming, horticulture.
It's not a conference, it's
this
a
is
party.
a gathering. This is a wonderful gathering. And I find it very inspiring, and everything that you've said. I'm just worried that the headlines that of your talk could be used by conventional farmers to beat the drum of food security, which they have done in the past to
Well, there's a bit of
retrench.
that to cut. Sorry, I'm being very rude because I'm aware I'm being told to shut up. There's because we come to the end of our time. There's a bit that could be used in that way, but I'm personally not again thinking about, well, where does your food come from? Well, it comes from Tesco. 30% comes from one company. If it was Tesco that had been taken out, not Marks and Spencer's and the Co-op, the choice of those two was extremely interesting to people like me. What if it was Tesco? Well, that's when you get the social dynamics that some of us are concerned about, where they run and become something very different. So you need to have a mature understanding of what's going on, which again is why I talk with you. You know, I've tried to give you a short digest of nearly 150,000 words. But you can skim read it. It's laid out, the big report, so you can skim read it. And there's a very neatly and very big print executive summary you can download. So please download it. I've done it for you. It's called Just in Case by me and 2 colleagues.